you, ladies and gentlemen. John Christopher Alexander tonight, filling in for the big John Mason. Can never fill his shoes, but the great thing about it is there's plenty of room in there. Thank you for joining us tonight. We have a great show for you tonight, ladies and gentlemen. My group is a Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, www.lacag.org, slaying legislative rhinos one vote at a time. If you feel that your voice is not being heard in the legislature, if you feel as though you're losing your grip on your country, if you feel as though your values are being dishonored and your voice is being ignored, go to our website, www.lacag.org, and see what we're doing. Fighting for constitutional principles, fighting for the average ordinary citizen of Louisiana who wants to take his state back. And we are doing it one vote at a time. Tonight, we have a very special guest, a couple of very special guests, in fact, Emily Chenevert and Paige Lowry from Moms for Liberty. Let me tell you a little bit about Moms for Liberty. You may be aware, many of you, that in our school system throughout the country and even in Louisiana, there are some concepts that are being injected into our school system that are being taught to our children that are very, very disturbing. One of those concepts is called social emotional learning. Now, you would think that that is pretty harmless. You want your kids to learn how to be social. You want them to learn how to manage their emotions, and you obviously want them to learn. But there are some things about this particular curriculum that are very disturbing. And I'm going to bring Emily Chenevert onto the show, who is a great patriot and who has an incredible knowledge and understanding of this particular issue. Emily, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Hey, Chris, great to be on tonight.
I really appreciate your coming on the show tonight. I want to start right out from the very beginning and ask you, Emily, as one of the founding members of Moms for Liberty, which my understanding it has invaded and exploded throughout the country because of parents, particularly moms, who are concerned about what their children are being taught in our schools.
Yes.
What is social emotional learning, and why should parents be concerned about it?
Well, first, I want to mention, Chris, and you mentioned a little bit about Moms for Liberty, is we are the East Baton Rouge Parish chapter, and I always like to kind of differentiate. We have a national sister organization, and so basically we are underneath that, and yes, it is growing. It is blowing up all over the nation because parents are realizing that they have to get involved in parental rights. That is our focus, right? We want to be involved in parental rights. So it's a great organization. And really, to answer you about SEL, SEL is just this idea of social and emotional learning. And there's a lot of discussion around SEL. There's a lot of people think it's a really good thing to get into the school systems of our education, of our children, of developing their social well-being and emotional well-being. And it really sounds great. It really does. A lot of the issues kind of around it and what we're looking at is a long-term game, and some of the idea of it, the implementation of it, and then this kind of newer terminology with it of transformative SEL, that's really shifting, it's going a little deeper into what SEL is, not just a social emotional learning component, but this civic duty, really activism, a lot of race relations stuff within schools, which we want kids to get to work together, all the things. But there's a lot of, when you get into the weeds of it, it's really not what it appears to be. In a lot of ways.
Emily, what is the source of it? What is the original source of social emotional learning?
Well, when I think of social emotional learning, it's hard to differentiate away from CASEL. CASEL's kind of like the end all be all castle.org of this development. I believe they started in 1994. This idea really of just getting into the classroom and helping children develop their relationships better within teachers, and then emotional learning, how to collaborate. They're big on collaborative. It's a collaborative effort, academic, social, and emotional learning. Obviously, hence the title. But the collaborate is a big deal. And collaboration is not bad, but there's a little bit of a shift in some of this, in this foundational work, from more of a individualism to collectivism in the long term. We may not see some of this, Chris, in the beginning and some of the K through kindergarten, first grade, second grade, but as this system and as this takes root, it's not just about the emotional health of children. There's some other components that are dealing as they get older. So
and
I
let me
guess
ask you about that. And let me ask you about that. Yeah, let me ask you about that. So you say on the surface of it, when you read, okay, social emotional learning, kindergarten through, what is it, fifth grade? Kindergarten through, birth through first. Is that what it is?
Birth through five, and what we're talking about things in Louisiana, right?
Yeah.
But
and so you look at it on the surface of it, and you say, well, when you look at, when you read the standards, you don't really see anything in the language of those standards that would say, okay, this is a problem. So where does the problem come in your view?
Well, in the standard, there's always a standard of, I guess you would say, something that is, there's curriculum, standards of what children will learn and what they have to learn. In this standard, it's a revised standard of what was an older standard, which, again, is reviewed on a regular basis to some degree. I don't know the exact time, how many years it's reviewed, but it's for the Louisiana's early learning and development standards for children, like you said, for birth to five. The standards are good. I mean, you're looking at things that we would all want our kids to learn, and I as well, right? Alphabet awareness, approaches to learning, attention, engagement, persistence, fine motor development. This is all great, right? No, that's okay. We love that. The issue that I have as an organization is the component of the social and emotional development. Now, it's not social emotional learning, but if you were to Google or type in based on a standard, let's say it is adopted, and you're looking for curriculum for this component for this part of the standard, it's going to come up as social emotional learning. The language is the same, the goal is the same. So really, it's that piece, right, Chris, within the standard, and it's what is it? It's kind of vague. Based on former standards,
so let's
right?
play this out for a
vague.
second. Yeah. So let's play this out for a second, Emily. You have a teacher who is obligated to implement these standards in the form of curriculum, these social emotional development, social emotional learning standards, and they're going to do a Google search to learn and to find out the curriculum, the best way to implement these standards. You're concerned about what they're going to find. Is that correct?
Yeah, because I'm a little concerned about that. Also, what is the world view on some of the issues of dealing with the foundational issues of interacting with adults, that view, other kids? I mean, look, here's the thing. There's a lot of basic issues as a parent. I mean, I have small children. They've been through the preschool and all the things. I want them to know how to deal with friends on a playground. Very basic level, things, obviously. So it's not being against all of that. It's just
it's Olivia Munn.
For the Big John Mason, I'm visiting now with Emily Chenevert with Moms for Liberty. And I've got a very important question for you, Emily, that I wanted to ask you about. I know that Moms for Liberty has exploded not only across Louisiana, but across the national stage. And my question for you is this. If you had to say the primary concern that, for instance, in Louisiana, these new standards that are being pushed by the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education, the concern that you have, is it that they are not specific and detailed enough, and they leave too much wiggle room for teachers' unions and national organizations to come in and inject certain theories that are contrary to the values of parents?
Yes, that's a big problem, and I know it's an issue that we're looking at because the former standards were a little bit more specific. There was a little bit of an explanation, I believe, at the last committee meeting of maybe why that was done. But the more specific would be is better, right? Because it leaves less room for trying to understand what is approved, what's not, in selecting curriculum, that type of thing. So that it's definitely, I think the more specific, a lot of people have brought that, not just me or not just, our organization, but other people that are concerned, that has been mentioned, right, to be more specific in those standards.
Is there a big difference in your view? Well, let me ask you this. Why, do you have any idea why, would you like to venture a guess, why the original standards were changed? My understanding is that the original standards were very detailed, and they covered most of the issues that are, or if not all of the issues that are now being covered by the new, quote, social emotional learning standards. Why were they changed?
Put it in that thing. Well, I need to go. Good question. I mean, why were they changed? Other than just being reviewed every so many years and looking into that, don't know the exact of why they were or why they're on the journey to being adapted or being adjusted. From my understanding, in looking through some of the scoring of some of the pre-K centers, that they were doing well on the old standards of performing scores. I can't speak on, I'm not looking at those scores and those things right now, but I don't believe it was because that children were failing or doing awful on the current standards. That's not my understanding. Again, I leave that open for discussion if someone is listening would maybe have a different understanding of that. So I guess my question is because of, are we adding certain things? I know there's a little bit more added to this idea. I'm looking at some of the comparisons, and there is a breakdown of that. We can look at it, but there is a little bit more added into this social and emotional development piece. A little bit. There is a little bit less of parental involvement. There's more language of parental involvement within the standards. From my understanding, in looking over the former standards, there's a little bit less of that in the newer standards. And again, I think this is the process, Chris, that it's, anytime people try to push up against anything, it's not a negative thing, right? I mean, I think anytime parents are trying to be involved, organizations are just trying to be a little bit of a watchdog and make sure everything is the best for our educators and the best for teachers and the best for our kids, it's a great thing, And I think that's the thing that we want to make sure, I know as an organization, is encouraging parental involvement, right? Understanding what is BESE, what do they do? Like, who is my BESE member, right? What do I do if I feel like I want to engage? And so that's the thing, is that we just think that this should be, in this next process of a vote, that we would like to see it kind of go back to the Board of Education to open up public comment and a little bit more time to review, like 20 days, to kind of participate in that process. Because I don't think too many parents knew there was a time to engage on the standards for early learning.
And is there, and Emily, is there an issue with regard to providing notice to parents? I mean, the BESE board, one of the complaints that we get is that the BESE board, the education board that oversees education policy in Louisiana, they get together and they go and they vote on things, and they're not providing proper notice to parents so that they can weigh in on these issues. Is that one of the problems too?
Yes. I mean, notice is a big thing, obviously. And here's the thing. And I always like to think of, as a citizen, I mean, your organization is to stand up for every citizen, every average citizen in Louisiana. And this is just a reminder. And I think there's some really great elected officials. There's people that are on, that are on committees and all these things. I just think it's a good reminder that we need to do a really great job at over-informing the public, right? If we could be better at over-informing people, what are avenues to hey, we have a public comment session, but like right now, it's time for you to, what do you think about these standards? Hey, parents, are we posting within the pre-K or in these areas that affect that age group, right, of parents and children? Do they even know this is happening? And so it's one thing to say it's happening. It's one thing even online, but the average parent right now they're working multiple jobs, both parents. They are doing things. They're keeping their family. They're surviving. They're rocking and rolling every day. And so they're not looking at what's going on in the Department of Education on a daily basis, right? They're not looking at what's going on within BESE. So we're just asking that on December 13th at this next meeting, this committee meeting, that we could have parents show up, email BESE board members, just and say, look, can we push this to the Department of Education? Let's open this up for public comment. I want to have,
and that's a big part of this, having full public comment. It's almost like, Emily, to me, looking at it, it's almost like they're trying to foreclose opportunities for parents and concerned citizens to speak to these issues. It's almost like they've forgotten that they work for us.
Well, it's true, and I think that's what's important. And look, the parents overall, as Moms for Liberty, East Baton Rouge Parish, and Moms for Liberty within this state, the overall focus, Christopher, is that we really have to keep the parental involvement at the forefront. Just keep it at multiple opportunities.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I want to bring Paige Lowry in, who's also a principal in Moms for Liberty. And Paige, are you there?
Hey, Chris, I'm here. Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad you're here, and thank you for all of your great work that you do. I wanted to ask you specifically, why do you think the original standards for early childhood development were changed or in the process of being changed in Louisiana?
So this was actually a very interesting point of fact that we did find out. So standards in general are redone and revisited every 7 years. But the early childhood development standards, which is birth through 5, there is no statute or legislation that requires the department to actually renew them within a certain time frame. So we questioned the same thing. We went back and looked, and the reasoning that we got for this was that they wanted to propose a new set of standards that was up to date with the scientific literacy learning options that are currently available in the market. Now, we say market because education is a market. It's a business.
Absolutely.
And listeners need to understand that. So aside from that, we said, okay, well, let's also look at, was there anything wrong with these standards? And as we went back and looked, you had high performance with the current standards almost across the entire board. So we really couldn't identify anything that justified.
Wait, what are you doing, Shannon? You're pulling the thing away.
Are you there?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. So we couldn't find anything that actually justified the reasoning to prompt the review of the old standards. The only inclination that we got, because there was no issues with performance with the current standards, because there's no statute that says it's required, the only reasoning that we come up with or that we were given was because it needed to be updated to the most scientific literature or literacy constructs that are currently available. One of those constructs is SEL, social emotional learning. If you look at you Google social emotional learning or even social emotional development, what you're going to get is tons of recommendations on social emotional learning.
And the social emotional learning, some of these concepts are troubling.
Very troubling. There's really a lot to unpack with social emotional learning. We've spent over a year getting very familiar with what this looks like. On the surface, it presents very well. It sounds great. It's all the things that we would want for our children to learn to be productive, citizens of society, right? To be productive young adults, young children. But as you actually start digging into these SEL constructs, the concepts themselves, the professional development, the overall big picture goal, it gets very concerning.
Yeah,
One of the things
and we're going to talk a little bit more about
me,
that. I want to hold
yeah.
you over, Paige. I'm going to hold you over through the break, and I want to talk to you a little bit more specifically about some of the troubling concepts of social emotional learning that parents and citizens need to know about. I'm looking forward to talking with you right after the break. Chris Alexander for the Big John Mason. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Chris Alexander here, Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, sitting in for the Big John Mason. And I have the pleasure of visiting with a couple of ladies from Moms for Liberty tonight, very powerful advocacy organization, not only in Louisiana, but throughout the country, visiting now with Paige Lowry. And Paige, when we left off, I want to ask you, one of the concerns that a lot of parents have been expressing to us is that, okay, so you have these concepts, social emotional learning, that are on the verge of being opened up and taught to our children in the public schools. But there's also something called transformative social emotional learning. What is the difference between social emotional learning and transformative social emotional learning? And are we looking, when we do this with this SEL, are we opening the door to something that's even more sinister?
Is she here? This is Emily. Is Paige still here with us?
Emily, well, we might have lost Paige, but Emily, did you hear my question?
Paige. I did. And I can help you a little
I'm
bit.
here, guys.
Paige,
go ahead.
Paige, did you hear my question?
I did. I'm sorry about that. That's a great question, Chris. There is a significant difference between social emotional learning and transformative social emotional learning. And I hope that your listeners out there take the initiative to go and look into what those differences are. I'm going to give some to you here tonight. The biggest change and shift that you see is originally when social emotional learning was a concept, it was focused on social emotional concepts like how to interact with your peers, how to regulate your emotions, all your self-identifying factors to kind of make you develop into a productive young child. A kid you could take to the grocery store, a kid that wouldn't be too disruptive in class. So different types of techniques that kind of helped mold that. I think every parent wants that, tries to produce that at home if they're capable. I know that's difficult for maybe single moms or certain family circumstances, but of course at school there was a reinforcement of that through the social emotional learning concept, the original. Now when we saw this thing shift to transformative, which has actually been over the most recent years, this is a concept directly from CASEL, that's CASEL. And this construct actually looks at the identifying factors of your identity within your society, your identity within your culture, your identity within your community. And there's many different identifying factors, and that's what makes the transformative SEL concept so interesting. So they have what's called intersectionality. Sorry. That's another word too, but that's actually a part of the
right. I understand. Yes, I understand the double entendre. Yeah.
But the point in the intersectionality concept is to see where the child is overgapping. It's all about where their place is in society. So it removes the concept of the individual and says, okay, who am I within my community? Who am I within my collective society? Now, again, at the surface, that doesn't sound bad. But when you get further into the curriculum itself, you get further into the teacher training, you get further into the actual frameworks from the organizations that are promoting this type of construct, it's something very different than what you see on the surface.
And what Paige is the most troubling about transformative social emotional learning in terms of the concepts that our children would be taught?
It's removing individual thought and individualism in the child itself, and this overall thought. I mean, we're talking about entire generations of children believing that what's the better good for the community is what's best for all. So it's no longer about what's good for me. It's about what's good for us as a community, what's good for us collectively. You know, and for me, that's
are there
on a national standpoint?
Yeah, on reading about things like in transformative social emotional learning with restorative justice, equity,
correct,
and concepts like that. My appreciation, and I wish you would speak to this, is that it's almost as though they're trying to sort of pit students against one another, sort of based upon their race. Is that a stretch?
No, that actually is very accurate. Equity plays a huge role in transformative SEL. Equity's been around. It came out in through the Obama era. That word, you see it utilized in corporations, you see it utilized in government, and it's made its way into our education system. Equity is to say everybody, right, has not only do they have a place at the table, but we all need to start at the same place. Now, that may sound good on the surface, but certainly any identifying factors that put you below someone else means that there's an equity issue there. So rather it's race, rather it's gender, rather it's your learning ability, rather it's it could be a million different things. That's where the intersectionality comes in, because they basically teach these children that they have all these different parts that identify who they are. And transformative SEL, depending on where you fall in that scale, depends on how much work you may need. Meaning, how do we get these children to be more in tune to the collective good of the community and the collective good of their peers versus what is good for them individually?
That makes sense. It sounds to me like they're sweeping with a pretty broad brush here.
Very, very. And
yeah.
That's
Emily, are you still with us?
Yes, I'm with us. I'm here, Chris.
Emily, I wanted to get you to weigh in on this and the extent to which transformative social emotional learning may be sort of pitting students against one another based upon race or ethnicity. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, Paige did a great job of breaking this down and looking at transformative but I'm, just coming directly from Castle's own site, this form of SEL is aimed at redistributing power to more fully engage young people and adults and working toward just and equitable schools and communities. So they, in their words, are like, we're going to kind of redistribute the power, and we're going to let these kids in schools, we're going to emphasize on their identity and like, what does that look like? And do they maybe identify differently than what society norms are? And that's okay. Belonging, collaborative problem solving within the Castle framework, which, Paige hit on that. And again, we're not against collaborative work ethic. I mean, we all have to work together in some capacities to do things. But I think the key thing, Chris, in all of this conversation is that you're dealing with the minds of young children. And so we as adults the frontal lobe of our brains, we are fully developed. We have a full level of reasoning power behind it. We're more mature. And so some of these concepts, when it comes to young minds who maybe some families are more biblically worldview minded, maybe some families don't really want to talk to their children about, hey, you're a victim mentality where root causes of inequity. Are there some? There may be, but to have it within the school system of critically examining this among young minds and children where their parents are not present, obviously. It seems as though it could lead, and I say the word could, it may, for some, they may say it's great, but it could lead to a lot of division, and it could lead to this idea of what are these kids that are sitting side by side? If we're going to just keep harping on some of these issues, how is that going to impact them as friends, right?
Yeah.
Day in, day out.
I want to hold you over, Emily, and I want to ask you and Paige one more question. I want to hold you over for one more second, for one more segment. Chris Alexander with Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group sitting in for the Big John Mason, and we'll be back shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, what a pleasure to have you tonight. J. Christopher Alexander filling in for the Big John Mason, and I'm visiting with two of the principals from Moms for Liberty, a great organization exploding across Louisiana and across the country. Moms concerned about what the curriculum is that our children are being taught in our schools. There is a big meeting coming up on December 13, a big meeting for BESE, the big education board that oversees Louisiana policy. Paige, tell the viewers about the meeting that's coming up, why it's important, and what they can do to weigh in.
Thank you, Chris. The meeting is a very important meeting that's coming up. We've actually been working on this since July, but it is something we became very aware of that the public was unaware of. It became very evident to us. So we said, okay, we need to start kind of getting the message out there that there is this big meeting coming up. The early childhood development standards that we've discussed earlier and a few times tonight, they're redoing those standards. Now, you have to remember these are state standards. So this is a big deal. This will be in place for a long time to come. What has taken place during this process has been a constant denial to the public to participate with additional public commenting, something that the Louisiana Department of Education does at the request of BESE on occasion, is they open what's called a portal, where the public can actually come in and participate in the portal and do open public commenting on the standards themselves, every section of the standard, all of that. So the original time frame that this was done was actually in July. It was May to July. And during that time, we were also in session. There was a lot going on. I think there was a total of 18 comments, public comments, that were done during that time. So we said, okay, well, obviously the public isn't aware of what's happening and how important these standards are because they'll be here for a long time to come. So we started raising awareness around that. We asked BESE for additional time. So what we're asking from the public, and we want the public to be informed on, is their part, their place at the table, how they can participate in this process. Where we at in the current stage is BESE is going to vote to accept these standards on December 13th at 9 a.m. That's at the Claiborne building downtown. What we would like to see happen is the public to show up, email their BESE board members, and say, listen, we, the public, would like additional time to participate, an additional opportunity to participate in this process. Let's give this back to the Department of Education. Let's open back up the portal for public commenting and give us our 20 days to chime in on this. Because I was
fair enough. Fair enough. Paige, is there an email?
Really not.
Paige, is there an email address that you can give to the listeners, or a telephone number, or what is the best way for them to directly reach the BESE board members?
So you would need to go to the BESE website. There's a list of your board members there. I don't want to rattle off all their emails on this call because it's quite a list. But I encourage you to go to the BESE website. But you can find them at the BESE website. Correct. And each of those email addresses will be listed, and I encourage you to send an email to each one of them requesting and asking them to grant the public an additional opportunity to weigh in on these standards. You want the public to give the public every opportunity to weigh in and express their opinion on these standards before they make a decision one way or the other. Correct. Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
So
that is
that's December 13th.
such a great piece of advice. And I would strongly encourage any parents who are listening to go to the BESE website and to email and or call your BESE member, because you have one, and
That's right.
tell them that you would like to have an opportunity to weigh in an open forum.
That's right. And if I could just say something additional here to your listeners, the public education system, regardless if your child is in that education system, if you homeschool, private school, whatever the case may be, what's happening in the education system affects every one of us. This is extremely important for concerned citizens, parents, grandparents, people of your community, all people of all communities, to get involved in what's happening in education, because we are headed down a very dangerous path. And there's a lot to go into that. But I will say this, just if there's any takeaway, the public itself, the public education system itself, that is 70% of your voter base. So 70% of your voters come out of the public education system. A high school career is 4 years, and then those kids vote. So I think we should make it a priority and an obligation.
We all have a vested interest in
Correct.
being involved in what our children are being taught,
and how they're being taught.
And how they're being
taught. Very
taught.
impressionable. Correct. Very impressionable. There are some dangerous things that are happening within the education system that truly will change a nation, not just your local communities or your state, but a nation. And so we want to encourage parents to get involved. It's a lot. That's one thing that we're here for as Moms for Liberties, is to help encourage parents and to encourage parental involvement in the education system, which sometimes seems really daunting. But there is a lot of work to be done, and we're going to continue to bring awareness around these issues that are taking place in our education system.
Well, I am personally, as the founder of Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, I am so thankful that Moms for Liberty exists. I'm so thankful for both of you and your involvement in this, and all that you have already done and are continuing to do to raise awareness. Lennon said, "Give me your fourth graders, and within 10 years, I will take over your country." Well, we're not going to allow that to happen, because we're going to be involved, and we're going to make sure that the values that are being taught to our children are consistent with the founding principles of our country, and are not divisive, and are not pitting students against one another. But you ladies, thank you so much for calling in and being guests tonight. And I have no doubt that the listeners benefited from your input and your advice. And onward we shall go. Thank you so very much for calling in.
Thank you, Chris, for having us.
Y'all have a great night.